Man walks down the street and says, why am I soft in the middle? Why am I? Man, my bones are so tired. Man, my bones are so tired. Actually, I'm getting a little soft in the middle. I knew I would hate the day when that song started to make sense. My wife has loved that song since we were kids. It's about when that came out, isn't it? You can be my bodyguard. I can be your long lost pal. You can call me Betty. Betty, when you call me, you can call me Al. Ah. So I am just getting over about 10 minutes of really intense fucking pain. Because, alas, there is no level of wisdom which will solve the following predicament. Because of the places my back is broken in, I get a severe backache, if you will, if I sleep, or sit, or stand for more than 4 hours. I, in fact, will be nearly incapacitated for the next 20 or so hours if I do so. That's manageable until you start getting the flu or some shit. Last night, I went to bed at like fucking 8 p.m. because I've been coming down with something. And then I just woke up here at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I thought I was okay. Until I started making coffee. And I think, just to be ironic, it was when I reached for the coffee filter that right here, on the backside, everything just decided to go. And I'm kind of afraid to stand up again. This is pretty intense just sitting down. Like, if you ever had somebody just punch you really hard or something right on a fucking vertebrae, that's about how this feels. I had somebody hit me with a skateboard once. In fact, right there in that very spot. And I suppose that's why it was where my spine decided to bend in half when I got hit by that car. Anyways. So I was getting all these different ideas in my head. And I was thinking, man, these would make a really great video. And it seemed like I'd been thinking about these particular subjects for a while. But apparently it was more off than on. Because right as I reached down to see, oh, what else did I write about this subject before I went to bed? Oh, that's a different subject. So that's going to be a different video. This is going to be a good video, though. Metaphysical metaphors. I know it's been a long time since I did one titled as such. Possession. That's going to be a good video. But today, I want to talk about history. Not, actually talking about it, because that's pretty much what we do every night. I want to talk about why history is so important. You know, like, say just as a school subject, okay? Hi, Mr. Russian. If you weren't a fucking coward, perhaps you could translate before you trolled me. I mean, how the fuck are you people still bothering me? You know that there's nothing you can do to win. Or, oh, I get it. It was decided that this lecture might actually be meaningful, and you're here to distract me. Oh, well done, well done. Again, because you're a coward. And so's Putin, and all your fucking generals, and all your intelligence people, and everybody who isn't out there protesting that fucking regime. Cowards. All of you. Because if you practiced what you preached, you'd be in fucking France right now. Hell, you'd be in Montana, retiring. Fuckers gonna pretend to end a war in 1991 just because they're too chicken shit to fight it. And we're supposed to feel like we got gotten over on? Am I supposed to feel like I've got gotten over on? Maybe the whole rest of my country did, but I sure as fuck didn't. Anyways, that would be because I know my history. Unlike probably anyone in Russia. You'll find plenty of Ukrainians in Canada that know all about your history. And I've had the advantage of finding these people several years ago and sitting through lectures and lectures and lectures of parts of history that Westerners just aren't privy to. Most of which includes Soviet tactics during and after World War II. All right. So, before I go and get my coffee right quick, I'm going to finish on the little sentence that I was on before the troll interrupted. When it's like a matter of, like when you're thinking about history, how important history is, I suppose the immediate logical reversion would be to compare history to like math and science and reading. And you might think, if you're one of the more enlightened, one of the wiser people in this country, that history is at least equal to these other subjects, math, reading, science. But I will tell you, math and science, and especially even reading, can all be used as weapons against you if you don't know your history. They can all be the destruction of humanity. Math, reading, and science can all lead you down some dark paths. Very dangerous paths if you don't know your history. You'd be better off being told from your parents without ever learning to read an accurate account of history as far as who your people's enemies are, why they want to destroy you, how they will deceive you, how they deceive others. Those are very important parts of history that, if you don't know, when you go and read, you won't be better off. Because then you'll be getting propagandized and deceived. And you might wind up in one person or another's slave army, that is, the people that they brainwash to use for a purpose. And yes, reading is a valuable skill, but you'd be better off illiterate than, say, a Trump supporter. You'd be better off illiterate than in an Islamic State. And I have no problem comparing those two things. Just last a few seconds. Just let me get my damn coffee. Fuck. Oh, fuck. Excuse me. Oh. Okay. That was intense, but not nearly as bad as when I had to actually make that pot of coffee. Fuck. Oh, okay. Well, that's not going to work. Good coffee. It's like I made it or something. You know, history and the way it provides wisdom is actually very simple. One of the things that kind of proves it, it's just a simple microcosm of the process. Why is it that when I brew coffee, it tastes so much damn better than when anybody else in this house brews coffee? History. That's why. Memorization of past events. Noticing things as they occur. Oh, fuck. You see, I noticed historically that if you leave just a little bit of brown water in the coffee pot, that next pot's gonna actually taste a lot worse. It may look insignificant, but you need to very thoroughly rinse shit out when you make coffee. And then, when you get your filter in the basket, the more towards the center you pour the coffee. If you get it to just pile up in a nice little cone, that coffee will brew more consistently and evenly. Because generally speaking, the ring of where the water comes out is towards the center. So if you have the coffee piled up towards the center, it increases the contact time. If you have the coffee even, the water goes into the center, and these bits on the outer edge tend to float. Then they're not releasing all of their flavor. So all it takes to make a superior cup of coffee is observe what it takes to make a mediocre cup of coffee. And don't do that. Well, without getting into too much of the specific examples that I usually discuss on this channel, life is a lot like making coffee. Politics, leadership even. You see, I suppose that's why I know Bulgarians for making coffee. But I've never heard of, oh, them Russians, they make some really good coffee. It's not something that, it's not a quality that their general processes are indicative of. You see, you would think they'd have learned, like, from Stalin. Morning, Mr. Conway. See, here in America, there's a lot of people who know how to make good coffee. And every single one of them people who figured out the secret to making good coffee, or anything that they've become skilled in due to reflection, due to refinement of self, due to refinement of their knowledge, by observing things over time, and even by training themselves on what people before them learned. They develop a pattern of recognition, lessons learned. Fool me once, shame on. We won't get fooled again. And somebody who could recognize this consequence and this shitty thing here led to this self-indulgence, this willingness to put my own needs above the needs of others. This led me to contributing to the downfall of America as a democratic state. You see, people who have the ability to refine skills and to refine knowledge in general, they don't get bullshitted the same way very often. All right, is everybody physically fit? So when it comes to observing politicians, when you see somebody make the same damn mistakes, you should be able to learn. This asshole is not what he first said he was going to be. But if these people who are capable of developing skills because they're capable of realizing and remembering mistakes and how to improve upon them, if the importance of history just would have been emphasized a little bit more logically to them, they wouldn't have tolerated someone like Trump to begin with, because they'd know history. You don't have to look far back in history to see the dangers of the rhetoric that is coming out of Trump's authoritarian cronies and himself. Sorry, still in a lot of pain here. I know I'm gonna need to sit like this to be able to walk, but sitting like this fucking hurts. My back is out. Coffee's already made. I already got some. It just fell on the ground to the best of my knowledge. Do you need that signed? Okay, good. Anyway. There's a lot of arguments to be made that maybe a Trump is something that's needed. When you think about it, World War III hasn't fucking started yet, right? We're overdue at this point. I mean, unless you count the war that had been going on for the past 20 years. But you could. There isn't something, though, that compares to that war that happened 100 years ago, or the wars that happened like clockwork 100 years before that, and so on. Shit! Nah, hold on. Okay, the nose is blown. Hoy. People need to know the repeating pattern of history. Not just to know how to avoid repeating its mistakes, as the cliche goes, but especially recently, something that really should have been more emphasized. Laney, cut it out. I'm not distracted at all this morning. Not me. whatever it is I was saying just completely went out of my fucking head. Not just doomed to repeating the mistakes of the past, but, and yes, especially today, okay? Why we have political correctness on some levels, but why we speak in the way that we speak to each other, why we have the process of communication and of decision making and of governing, why we have these processes, that comes from wisdom. And people who use these divisive, rhetorical, nonsensical arguments to try to basically scare people into supporting them, or, you know, entice their greedy bone. These things wouldn't work if people knew their history. Americans shouldn't even allow a politician to stand in front of them and speak like anything that could lead to Hitler. And let's talk about Gene Roddenberry for a second. Gene Roddenberry did not live to be as old as Stan Lee. Why? The answer is as simple as looking up what year he died. I think. I have no physical evidence of this, but I can logically deduce it. And here's how. By knowing history. See, the Soviet Union has historically assassinated people who are of levels of influence that can be perceived as a threat to them. Should they choose to use their songwriting abilities, John Lennon, or their theatrical or production otherwise abilities, like Gene Roddenberry, storytelling abilities, first, to further the communist cause, but you'll find that these people who wind up dying untimely deaths, or oddly timed deaths, you can't exactly say. I mean, he lived to be a pretty old age, but I think he could have lived to be older. I mean, unless you think of Trump as the model of health and human evolution, then I suggest that we accept the lifespan of the human male to be much older than 73 years old. So there's got to be something causing somebody's death, no matter what. People don't just, there's no natural causes. Okay, there's no such thing as natural causes. People die for reasons. Whether or not the doctors happen to understand that reason why they died, that's a different story. But one thing people who get assassinated by the Soviet Union, as far as celebrities go, generally have in common, and this is the way you can logically deduce whether or not their cause of death should be investigated. were those people historically for communism or against, say, conservative Christian rule, right? Unabashedly. Not trying to make those people be better Christians, just trying to destroy Christianity because of those people who don't follow it very well. Okay? And you'll find that Roddenberry has a very low opinion of religion. Certainly people like Jean-Luc Picard, for instance, basically considers religion to be a archaic holding back of society. But as time went on, as the Next Generation script progressed, you saw less of a tendency to, I don't know, introspectively mock old traditionalist type societies. And more of a tactical and strategic sort of educational expose where the different alien races mainly the Romulans, the Cardassians, and the Borg, don't tell direct metaphorical parodies, or don't have direct metaphorical parody with, not parody, don't have direct metaphorical parody with any of the historic and tactical situations that we face, although the argument can be made in some cases. But overall, it doesn't seem like it's too blatant. Okay. But effectively, what he does is expose how tactics of deception and things like this work. And because of this, if I were in the KGB and I, would know about these major American influences as far as celebrities go, whether or not he worked for us in the past, the level of historical knowledge and the tactical educational ability of Gene Roddenberry had to be stopped in 1991. It could not be allowed to go any further. That man could not be allowed to analyze the situation and educate people on it via fiction anymore. So the world went from Star Trek to X-Files, basically, and how'd that go for us? The sci-fi world, anyways. Ow. Fuck. Okay, I really gotta straighten this part of my back up. This really sucks. Now, historical relevance applies to everything from politics to war strategy to app writing. And it certainly applies to data analytics as far as the current situation goes. I mean, I've talked extensively about how we should know that our churches are targeted, our social order is targeted, and why it is targeted. We should learn that there's a difference. We should know historically. We should have seen historically by now. We should have proof. It should be a scientifically known fact that real Christianity is more productive and civil than any other belief system. I'm talking like Martin Luther King's Christianity. Okay? You know what? The Federation, as much as it seems to be an anti-religious force, was essentially based upon Christian principles. And it was those principles of putting the needs of others before yourself, of not interfering, not oppressing, not taking advantage, but actually believing that being helpful, that fighting for justice would give them a better future. That to me is the essence of Christianity. And anything else you want to argue about it is semantics. Communism, for instance, like many other things, essentially a plagiarism of Christianity, used to a means of denying self, so that the people in power wouldn't have to worry about you. Instead of putting others before yourself, it's putting the needs of the collective above the needs of the individual. Isn't that right, Mr. Spock? The needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few. Yeah. Oh, fuck. I just need my fucking spine to not be grinding into itself. Ow, fuck. Damn it. Prop my back up on my elbows right quick. And then I'll stretch back again. See if it fucking straightens out. So, it seems to me that it would be easy enough, not necessarily easy, but easy enough to come up with a series of algorithms that could analyze historically gathered CIA data, historically gathered economic data, and even history itself for patterns of deception, for patterns of, say, promotion of certain ideologies from investments from certain areas. Hmm? We need to teach a computer, I suppose, since it doesn't seem there's, enough people capable of doing this objectively. We need to teach a computer to learn how to play good idea, bad idea, to learn the difference between right and wrong, essentially, to learn the difference between things that bring people together, make them more productive, make them get along better, make them more capable of coming up with good ideas on how to progress the needs of the way the needs of humanity are fulfilled technologically, sociologically. We need a computer database of what it means to be wise. We need a record. What was a good idea? What was a bad idea? What had good effects? What had bad effects? Because we're not facing an enemy who considers victory in the same way we do. We think of victory, and we as Americans, with our limited knowledge and history, think back on the wars we've fought with tanks and planes. And we all wind up thinking about, well, before our recent little fiascos, it was historically the case that we would all think about Vietnam before starting to scratch our heads. Well, we won this one, we won this one, we won one, and then Vietnam, we declared victory and left. But we could learn a lot through algorithmic recognition by going back to all of these different wars we fought, to going back to any specific paradigm shift, okay? Whether it be the Iraq War, the Vietnam War, 9/11, the collapse of the Soviet Union, 9/11, 11/9. And the same way I've been, since 2014, committed to providing the data that can be used now historically to figure out exactly how this propaganda and psychological warfare campaign not only played out in the past few years, but how that connects to a greater historical campaign. See, I noticed this because my brain works like an algorithm, and I recognize the fucking pattern. So if I recognize the pattern, you can guarantee that you can teach a computer to do the same thing. These tactics have been used before. These aspects of our thought process, our psychology, our morality, they've been targeted before in the same ways by people who happen to be from the same regions. And it doesn't take much of a fucking algorithm to analyze geographical history. And if you wanted to ask a computer, based upon just geographical history alone, based upon the lines on the map and how they expand and contract throughout time, that computer would be convinced that the book of Genesis is an accurate account. Because it says that some evil fucker went to the land of Nod, and Nod is north. And, well, the computer would notice that in the north is where all these fuckers come from. The north from where that book was written, that is. From the Middle East. North. Or from the land of Cush. North. Oh wait, I'm sorry, do humans not know where that was written? Anyways. Y'all just keep trying to find Shangri-La. See how that works for you. God, that's painful. Just right there in the middle. Just, ow. Fuck. So that's the skateboard truck. The place where it bent, I thought, was further down. Yeah. Skateboard truck, bend. I think they're like 4 or 5 vertebrae apart, can I think of it? See, now that I've had more coffee, I can remember. See, I know now from history. When riding on the sidewalk near a business district where there's a bunch of parking spots between, that you're in between. You're in between a bunch of parking spots and the road, traffic. You want to be going slower than traffic. You really want to be going slower than traffic. Either slower or much faster. Those are the only 2 options. Because when you're riding a bike like this, and somebody just happens to want to park, and you don't have time to stop, your life will never be the same. Walking, sitting, trying to sleep, never. Anyways. So it seems to me that we need an independent sort of not election oversight in a way that would interfere with, or not interfere with, but that would police the elections, not jurisdictional oversight, but historiological oversight of all political activity in this country, whether it be from foreign governments or indigenous activism. We need to be able to look and see how information was disseminated, the effects of it, the moral degradation, the economic impact, whatever effect it was. And its origin, and how not only financing helped it along, but how the policies of technology platforms allowed these things, how those technology platforms changed their policies, if they did, to accommodate propaganda from foreign agents or individual political activists or PACs or groups in this country. I mean, in my opinion, while it's still pretty shitty, the Republicans can send agents to go work for fucking Google if they want to, right? But that's something that people should know about. That's something that should be reported on after the fact. And if there's foreign agents affecting policy that, depending on the platform, can wind up governing, helping, or sabotaging our daily lives the way Google can, it is an absolute national security imperative. It is an absolute national security imperative that we know as much as we can about this. If we can't find out who these people are, we at least need to find out what changes were made, when they were made, in response to what other events, and see if we can ascertain a why from that. Because without that form of data analytics, we are defenseless. All of our math, all of our science, all of our reading, our superior technology, our superior weaponry and tactics, our superior form of government, democracy, free speech itself, reading. It's all being used against us. Even the very idea that America is the greatest country in the world has been used against us. And frankly, an algorithm that recognizes historically productive ideals should recognize the appalling nature of arrogance that has turned so many people off, to say the least, about America. And would it be a coincidence if those right-wing pricks who are beating that America's the greatest country in the world shit over our heads happen to be influenced by Russia? To understand that it's possible is to have a basic grasp of what it would take to defend this country. To understand that it's likely is to actually have an understanding of the danger we face. You just have to take a step back and realize they've been a lot smarter than we've been. They are a lot more strategic, a lot more calculating than we are. And when it comes to the math, they've got it down to a science. and they know that all they need to do is control what we read, and according to their science, they will have us by the numbers. You see, the reason why it might take an algorithm to recognize these things, I suppose the reason why it's something that I recognize that a lot of people didn't recognize, is because we misunderstand victory. We think victory has to be total. We don't understand that objectives are completed on a percentile basis. And all that has to happen is these percentages need to add up. And we become conquered. No one thing has to happen that gives them total victory. Their victories are registered in percentile psychological effects until one day we are basically possessed. Metaphorically and legalistically. And that's what we're going to talk about on the next live stream. How possession works in more than one way. Because when your thoughts are not your own, when what you've been led to believe in, when the way you've been led to logically deduce things has basically been given to you by a pattern of repetition, when you reply to facts as fake news, for instance, when you're full of just programmed response after programmed response, you're possessed. Not only are all of those destructive, ignorant, programmed responses basically starting to comprise your spiritual energy, you are being patterned after it. So, demon possessed, in a matter of speaking, clearly. But because you are demon possessed, you are possessed. You are a slave. You are a possession. You are a pawn. And without history, you'd never know it. And you'd certainly never be able to avoid it. Now, that being said, obviously, history, analyzing it, is always better when you actually know the real history as opposed to just the history written by the victors. But even the history written by the victors, even what's left of the Bible being compiled by politicians, even studying that can lead to great amounts of wisdom. And all you need to do is recognize this has been tainted. And you may not be able to get the original history, but you'll be able to deduce some of it. And you'll get to see, by comparative analysis, why these people wanted us to not talk about those people anymore. Why these people were replaced with these people. Why this ideology was replaced with this ideology. And what you might observe overall, to get back into general channel topics, is You have an old covenant that gets replaced or fulfilled by a new covenant. And then that new covenant is abandoned for political religiosity. But when it comes to what a computer can figure out about man's behavior over all these years, there's been no more constructive force for the advancement of civilization and for the benefit of mankind than Christian as it was first taught. And you wouldn't even have to teach that computer who Mary Magdalene was. You see, you wouldn't even need the real history that I know. All you would need is the history of the victors, and that would still be provably the case. And the fact that it had been usurped would even more demonstrate that case. Because just for Christianity to have its shortcomings, it had to be usurped and replaced with a chauvinist version of itself. That's what the data shows. When it's properly historically analyzed, that is the interpretation. And, well, like I said, I don't want to get specifically into too many tangents about different parts of history. I just wanted to make one video to emphasize exactly how important it actually is, and to see if I can demonstrate and convey why, for instance, I've been saying that the Democrats or any Republican who wants to reform the system needs to talk about history, needs to preach that others need to learn their history, needs to shame people for not being taught by their grandma, for not listening to their grandpa, for not knowing the lessons of the people who fought and died in World War II, or for not knowing enough about history to know about our own Civil War, for instance. Anyways, that is going to be all for this morning. I have got to go. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to click the like button. And thanks to Mr. Conway for joining me again as always. And share this video if you think anybody could benefit from it. Tell them to be patient, because I'm not your average little fast-paced, gonna tell you everything all at once and clip everything and not even let you hear me take a breath type person. But if they watch my videos, they might actually learn something and become, you know, wiser beings. Whether or not you believe that's true, you can't argue with the following statement. The world could seriously use some more wiser beings these days. Yeah.